Hey, Facebook Live. Hope you are doing great today. We are live with Stephen Scheeler in just a moment. We're just broadcasting. I'm about to hit that button. Stephen, how you doing, man?
I'm fantastic. Great to be here.
This is going to be a lot of fun because this a little bit meta because Stephen was one of the first 20 employees at Facebook. I love the OMS acronym for you that you shared on your talk.
Yeah.
With people that were half your age. It stood for Old Man Scheeler. And
That's right.
I'm about the age that I think you were when you started over there. So it touches a little bit of a sensitive part with me. And I love how you just kind of leaned into that challenge. We're not actually recording yet. So that was, that sounds like a great lead in. Don't take the bait. But this is going to be great. So, anybody that watching this, and if you're watching this, you want to wiggle your finger so that we share Stephen's message, because if you're sensitive to issues of, I'll just say the A word, ageism, which never shows up in Stephen's talk at all. He doesn't go there, but it kind of touches on the generation gap and, working with, people in a different age demographic than you. If any of these things are relevant to you, the reason that I do these interviews is to take what Ted really leaves on the table in all these amazing interviews and really go behind the talk. So we're going to dig in there in the next few minutes. If any of this stuff is relevant, and it will be in another decade or so, if it's not right now, you want to share this, comment, and make an impact. So, and let me know in just a moment if you're watching from somewhere, just type it in. Periodically, I'm able to show questions or things like that on the screen, and then we'll acknowledge those at the end of the actual podcast recording. So without any further talking, any questions for me, Stephen, before I hit the button here on the podcaster?
I'm all good. Let's go.
All right, let's do it. And we are live in 3, 2. We are live with Stephen Scheeler. Stephen, are you ready to talk?
I'm ready to talk. Let's do it.
Stephen Scheeler is the former top 20 global executive at Facebook, and today, as the founder of the Global Advisory, the digital CEO, and senior advisor to McKinsey & Company and executive in residence at the Australian Graduate School of Management, Stephen partners with the CEOs and boards of some of the world's leading companies to help them build world-beating digital strategies, capabilities, culture, and leadership. Stephen Scheeler, welcome to the talk.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, your talk is called "The Oldest Guy at Facebook," and I love this because you were one of the first employees. You were about roughly double the age of Zuckerberg and the other people there, and they lovingly came up with an acronym for you, OMS.
That's right.
Old Man Scheeler. How did you feel when you first saw that there was an acronym, not that flattering acronym that they gave you?
Well, it was, I'd been there a week or two, and then people started calling me OMS. Hey, OMS, how you doing? OMS, where you going? And I was, what's this OMS thing? And somebody said, it's Old Man Scheeler. And at that moment, I wasn't old. I was 47. Anybody who's in our age demographic know that.
Yeah, we're not old.
My father will tell me. My father was 90. He says 50 was the best year of his life. He felt fantastic. So, I got into this. It was sort of through the looking glass, really. I joined Facebook almost accidentally. And when I joined the business, the average age in Facebook was 25. I was 47. Mark Zuckerberg was 27. So I started working with Mark and other folks in the Facebook business. And you start to look around and you realize you are the oldest person by far in this room. And they noticed it before I did, really. It's just started to come out. OMS became the nickname, and I started to realize there was this big gap between me and everybody around me.
Oh my gosh! So, well, you had 5 things that you learned right there at Facebook, and probably the one that's the gatekeeper to all the other ones, in my opinion, Stephen. When you said curiosity is actually a superpower, And when you
Yeah.
can go into a new experience just curious and not have to unlearn all the old baggage, it'll help you adapt to any situation. And certainly the story that you told, you were able to successfully do that. So please fill us in on the rest of the story.
Yeah, is when I started at Facebook, my big challenge was, what's my job, and what's everybody else's job, and how are we going to make this thing happen? Facebook was a really young company, and in a way that was an advantage for me because nothing was really written down. It was very kind of I remember we didn't have an org chart. There was no job descriptions. I literally had to grab people, pull them into the room, and say, what do you do, and what am I supposed to be doing? It was that sort of loose. And I turned that to my advantage because what I sort of figured out was curiosity is a superpower we all have. And at the time, I was a pretty successful business person. I've been in business a long time. I've had pretty senior roles at other companies. And I realized I had this sort of formula for doing things and for being successful. And I needed to challenge all that. And so the big way that I did it was I went around Facebook. People from all different areas of Facebook, folks who were working in areas I didn't understand at all. And I started asking them, what do you do? What's your job? What do you think my job is? Take me through what your job is. Explain to me what you do. And this just sort of opened up the aperture of my brain. And I've since done more kind of reading on curiosity and sort of thinking about curiosity. And I realized that one of the big hallmarks of age is not how old you look or how much gray hair you have. It's your loss of curiosity. And we all know this if we have kids or grandchildren. You see how curious they are about the world, and if you research people like mathematicians, the best mathematicians in history did their best work before they were 25, and it just has to do about the sort of fungibility of the human brain and the way it's a sponge in its early years, and then it gets kind of calcified. But you can find ways, just as yoga can sort of make your body more supple, or Pilates, or whatever. It's the same with your brain. You can find ways actually to open up the curiosity of your brain, and that ultimately, I think, is what keeps you and makes you and keeps you young. And that's what I really realized at the heart of my experience at Facebook.
So you basically sat everybody down. I don't remember how many people you were leading or managing at that point, and you said, "Okay, good boss, bad boss. What's the criteria?" And you let them basically write essentially part of your job description, unofficially. So
it was my job description really for the first year, and I'll paint the picture. I was on my way to the first. I had an offsite set up with my Australia team, and there was probably about 10 people at the time, even fewer, probably 7, and they were all probably the average age about 20, 27, 28 years old. So a little older than the average, but still 20 years younger than me. And I knew a number of them were really hardcore, long-term Facebookers, really, really skeptical of me, cynical of experience. And so I'm walking on my way to this meeting I'd set up. We were going to spend the whole day together. And I was like, how am I going to open things? I'd only been there a week. They barely knew me. How am I going to kick it off? And I had this idea on the way over there. I said, why don't I just open it up? One of the things I did, I opened it up. I said, look, here's 2 pieces of paper on the wall, and you just write down I wrote good boss on one, bad boss on the other. I said, you write my job description. And so they all went up over the course of a few minutes and just wrote all this stuff on each piece of paper. And, as you can imagine, what was on the good boss side and the bad boss side. The good boss was, you look after me and you don't play politics and you're transparent and, you don't make decisions behind our backs, all that sort of stuff. And bad boss was the opposite of those things. And it in a way, it was kind of obvious, but what was good is it gave them an opportunity to express it. It put it in black and white on pieces of paper. And I just said, that's my job description. My job is to make you successful, and this is what I need to do. So I took those 2 big pieces of paper, I put them by my desk, and I left them there for like 8, 9 months. And the reason I had them there was when anybody came to talk to me, I could point at it and say, am I doing what you told me to do? Am I fulfilling your job description for me? And that was, again, it was a really good way of me, one, earning credibility with this other generation, but 2, genuinely finding out, what do they want, and how could I give it to them?
Yeah, well, I'm hearing so many amazing things right there. If you're in management or leadership or executive roles or anything like that, what a great way to kind of acknowledge, especially in a startup, acknowledge, hey, we can do anything, sky's the limit, but I want to hear what you think and I want to know your criteria because if all of us are going to be successful, it's going to be because of you and I working together.
Exactly.
Was that your thinking, or was it kind of more spontaneous? Was it where was it in the continuum there? Because it almost sounds like you're only there a week. You're trying to figure out what to do.
It was, yeah, it was a bit spontaneous. And to be honest with you, I knew I had to do. I knew the broader theme of what I wanted to do, which was establish credibility with
Mhm.
the millennials that I had to lead. But at the same time, what were the specifics of how I did that actually was the harder part. That's where I got bits of inspiration here and there. And often, to tell you the truth, I often get my best ideas when I'm under pressure and I
Mm.
get to and there's a deadline looming. I'm literally minutes from the deadline. Uh, so I do a lot of, for example, I do a lot of public speaking now since I left Facebook. And often I'll think of how I'm going to open my talk 5 minutes through 2 minutes before the talk. I'll come up
Mm.
with an anecdote or a story. And I just find it works more. It works for me. That's sort of planning it out long ahead of time. So, but at Facebook, I was always under this pressure because every single day I was in. We were open plan. We're moving fast. We're having all these meetings and everything's happening. So I was constantly thinking, how do I establish credibility with these folks? Because I knew my success or failure was going to be based on how
Mm.
well I could pull this team together and harness their capabilities and their talents. And I would fail if I couldn't harness them and they essentially turned against me, which luckily they never did.
Well, we're talking right now to literally the oldest guy at Facebook, Stephen Scheeler. That's actually the name of his TEDx talk. And we're about to pivot over to you, Talk Universe, in talking about the preparation and performance of Stephen's talk. We'll be right back in just a moment with the Blitz Round. And we're back with Stephen Scheeler, the oldest guy at Facebook. It's time for the Blitz Round, where I ask Stephen a series of either or questions related to the preparation and performance of his recent TEDx talk. Stephen, are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right. First question, were you invited to speak or did you apply?
I was invited.
Well, and you just answered this one. Are you a memorizer, improviser, or a blender? It sounds like you're highly improvisational. Was that true for preparing for this?
I'm more an improv, but for this, I took the opposite view. I needed to prepare in detail and memorize.
Okay, well, so that's totally different from what you said, which is wonderful. How did that serve you? Are you glad you did it that way?
I am very, very glad I did it that way. For those of your listeners and yourselves who've done TED Talks or who do speaking, there's you get into sort of a onstage mindset, and the pressure or the lack of pressure or whatever. There's something of an acting nuance to actually standing on stage and speaking to people. And generally, I've been in my career. I've spent a lot of time on stage talking to people, small groups or big groups. I feel pretty confident and comfortable just doing things improvisationally. But when it came to TED, I realized that the stakes are going to be so much higher here. My TEDx was in Sydney, and it's quite a big TEDx, and it's 5,000 people, and I think it's one of the biggest in the world. And so as time went on, and I got closer to it, the TEDx was in June. It was probably in February or so that I first got invited to talk to the organizers. It was probably around March that I got invited, and so I had a few months kind of warm up to it. But as that process was going through, I realized that I cannot wing this. I need to memorize, and memorize I did. So my talk was really letter perfect. I memorized actually absolutely everything, every 1,842 words of it, I think it was in the word count. And what it did for me on the day was it just made it so easy because once I got onto the stage, I was completely relaxed. I actually had I had no nervousness whatsoever. I've actually probably never been more relaxed than that moment when I was on the TEDx stage, which is ironic because when I was backstage this moment before, I've never been more nervous about speaking than I was at that moment. But when I got onto the stage, it just washed away, and because I had the memory, there was no teleprompter, no notes, but just because I had the memory, and I've rehearsed it so many times, I could just live in the moment. And I would say this is akin to I used to play violin and piano as a kid and teenager. I was reasonably good. But it was, it's rehearsing a performance. So, you rehearse with the music, but once you get on stage, you don't have the sheet music, and you're just going from memory. And I think my TED was very much that way.
Interesting. From one performing artist to another, I spent my backside spent a lot of time on the piano bench as well, Stephen. So that's a great description of the performance mindset. And so thank you for that. What was the most, in your preparation for this, Stephen, what was the most painful part of your talk that you had to cut out for time?
Oh, wow. Yeah, there was one, I don't know if it was painful, but there was a certain anecdote that I really was close to my heart that I wanted to include. There were probably two anecdotes. And one I just couldn't make fit into the narrative. Like it's probably my best Facebook story, but it just didn't fit with this particular talk. And so I had to leave that out. And I kind of got over that pretty quickly. But the second one was one that I felt was really at the heart of my talk. And it was about another person inside of Facebook that I wanted to talk about, who is a legendary Facebooker and a friend and I think an amazing person. But the advice coming back to me from the curator of TEDx, who was very, very helpful in pulling my talk together. She really helped me. Like, she was just really saying, look, it takes the energy away from you and the talk, because you're bringing in this other person in, and it was at the wrong point in the talk. So eventually I had to let go of that person. I do mention them in my talk, but in a very light way. I don't actually mention their name. I reduced their role in the talk from fairly big to very small. And that was hard for me to do, and I was sort of fighting with the curator on it. But she was right. She was right, and I was wrong. I was really grateful for her advice.
Well, that's a great lesson for us all. I mean, we all want to have all these extra stories and things like that. Sometimes it takes that outside perspective, that trusted, in the end, outside perspective and it takes us letting go of our, precious stories that we want to share so much.
Yeah,
how do you know the difference?
How do I know the difference?
Yeah, no, it's cutting a
diamond. That's the way I equate it. It's the biggest diamonds aren't the most beautiful. You have to get the cut right with the stone, and so you have to be you have to be unsentimental about what you shave off, and what comes out the other end. You have to remember that the audience never sees all the stuff that you left on the cutting room floor. They just see the end result, and so therefore they can't compare it to what you were building before. They only see one thing, and I think that's sort of liberated me a bit.
Yeah. Well, and how did you know the difference between, do I trust the voice who is telling me to do something that I don't really feel right now versus, it's probably the right thing to do in the end?
Yeah. I think with me, I was thinking about what there's a thread or a through line that runs through your talk, and there's a center of energy that is in your talk as well. There's sort of in my talk, there was a center of energy, and when I started to question certain parts of my talk, there were lots of other things that got left on the cutting room floor as well. I just tried to work out, was it along that through line? Did it actually sit on that through line? And did it sit around that center of energy? And if it seems superfluous, or it's just detail, or it's it's sat off on the side as some bauble, I would be quite ruthless. I'd sort of push it out of the way. And I think one of the great disciplines of TED is that it's just the way it's described, which is an idea worth sharing. And in my TED, I got 12 minutes. You can do a lot in 12 minutes, but the reality is you can waste a lot of time in that 12 minutes too. So the great thing about TED was how I learned an economy of speech that I probably hadn't known for a while. I tend to use more words rather than fewer, and many of us do. Many Americans like myself do, I find. But when I was a kid, I was a big fan of Hemingway. I used to read a lot of Hemingway. And what I loved about Hemingway is this economy of language, right? It's very few adjectives, very, very few adverbs, very simple. And I realized that I think a great TED Talk has that same kind of Hemingway-esque simplicity to it.
Yeah, I've never had it described that way before. I really appreciate that.
Well, I always wanted to write something that would be worthy of a Hemingway short story collection, and I feel like my TED Talk might have gotten close to it.
I think so. Well, we're enjoying this talk, the Blitz Round with Steven Scheeler. He is the oldest guy at Facebook. That is the name of his talk. And if you want to watch that talk, which I absolutely recommend, you can type that into YouTube, or you can go to our show notes page at BeTheTalk.com. We will have a link there, and we will also have a link to Steven's website. It's stevenscheeler.com.au. Steven with a PH, Scheeler, SCHEELER.com.au. And we'll be back in just a moment with Steven Scheeler for the final word of advice. And we're back with Steven Scheeler. It is time for the final word of advice.
My final word of advice, my God, this is harder than my TED Talk. Look, if you're preparing for your talk, or if you're thinking about getting on stage, wherever you're at, find that pure thing that you have utter credibility in talking about, and in a sense only you can talk about, and then find the passion and the meaning in that talk. When I started on my TED journey, when I was first approached, it was mainly because I had been at Facebook, and I have a bit of, in this country, I have a bit of a profile for speaking, but it wasn't because I had this talk ready to go. I had to sit and think through, what am I going to talk about? And I spent a lot of my time on stages talking about things like business and digital strategy and digital business. But that wasn't going to be my TED topic. In fact, I said, no, you can't talk about that. So I had to find this other pure kind of purity, this pure core. And I arrived at this concept of being the oldest guy at Facebook. And what was the idea we're sharing was this cross-generational kind of communication challenge that I had, that I think so many people in the audience would understand. They'd understand one side or the other of it. And so I think for any of your listeners, when you're thinking about your TED Talk, try to find that one thing that your experience can uniquely speak to, and then really kind of percolate it and find those little nuggets of insight and epiphany that you can share, and then just shape it down like you're cutting a diamond, and you'll come up with something beautiful. I think everybody has a beautiful TED Talk in them. You just got to find it.
Well, Steven Scheeler, thanks so much for coming on the talk today and sharing your wisdom with Talk Universe.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, that's a wrap. Great interview. Thank you.
Terrific. That was great. I really enjoyed it.
Well, awesome. And yeah, so I mean that's about what it is. We have some other guests coming on, so check it out, everybody. Steven, I will catch you later, and I'll follow up with you via email when this comes out. We're about 3 weeks or so out, and the Facebook Live is immediately shareable as well.
Absolutely. Terrific. Great. Well, thanks. I really appreciate being on the show, and I'm going to be an avid listener from here on out. So I think it's a great thing you're doing. Terrific.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Steven. Take care.
Take care. You too.